I never thought the last words I'd hear from my daughter would be a lie wrapped in a forced smile. Eleanor had survived 83 years of hardship, silent revolutions of the soul, and betrayals disguised as affection. She had buried a husband who never returned from the cotton fields in Texas. She had raised 4 children alone on a ranch where water was worth more than gold, and she had cooked until her fingers were raw, just so those children could study, eat, and dream of a future she never had. But nothing, absolutely nothing in her entire life, prepared her for the moment when her own flesh and blood looked her in the eyes and lied with the ease of someone asking for salt. "Don't cry, Mum. It's only for a few days, I promise." Those words still echoed in her head like broken, out-of-tune bells as she sat on a green plastic chair beside a dirty window overlooking an empty courtyard. The nursing home smelled of cheap disinfectant, mixed with old urine and reheated food. The walls were the color of sadness, a yellow that once tried to be cheerful, but now just looked sick. From where she sat, Eleanor could see other seniors wandering aimlessly, some talking to themselves, others just waiting. Waiting for what? No one knew anymore. Maybe death, maybe a visit, maybe a miracle. It had been 3 months since her daughter Patrice left her here. 3 months without a phone call, 3 months without a visit, 3 months hoping the door would open and she would see the face she had watched be born, grow up, laugh, and cry. But the door never opened for her. It opened for others, for those whose children kept their promises, for those who still mattered. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the memory flood her like the muddy water of a rising river. She could clearly see that day in June, when Patrice arrived at her small wooden house outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, driving a new SUV that shone so brightly under the sun it hurt her eyes. Patrice stepped out of the vehicle wearing dark sunglasses and a white dress, which was entirely inappropriate for the dusty ranch. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her lips were painted a deep red that made her look like a stranger, an unfamiliar person. Eleanor had come out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, surprised to see her daughter on a Tuesday afternoon. Usually, Patrice only visited for Thanksgiving, and only if she didn't have other plans. "Mum, I need to talk to you," Patrice had said, without even hugging her, without asking how she was, without noticing that her mother had lost so much weight, the bones in her wrists looked like dry sticks about to snap. They went inside and sat at the wooden kitchen table Eleanor had inherited from her own mother. It was a table that had seen weddings, christenings, wakes, and all the small daily tragedies of a family living paycheck to paycheck. Patrice refused the coffee her mother offered. Instead, she pulled some papers from her designer handbag and slapped them onto the table with a dry thud that rattled the salt shaker. "Mum, this can't go on," Patrice began, without looking her in the eyes. "You live here all alone, in the middle of nowhere. You have no one nearby. What if you fall? What if you get sick? I found a perfect place for you, a place where you will be cared for, where there are nurses all the time, where there are people your age. You'll be better off." Eleanor felt the air rush out of her chest. She knew those words. She had heard them before in the community when Mrs. Higgins was taken to a home by her children because it was what was best for her. Mrs. Higgins had died 6 months later without having seen her house, her chickens, or her herb garden again. She had died calling for her children, but none of them arrived in time for the funeral. "I don't want to go anywhere, honey," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "This is my home. I was born here. I lived here with your father. I raised all of you here. You can't just remove me like I'm an old piece of furniture." Patrice sighed impatiently, as if she were explaining the obvious to a stubborn child. "Mum, don't be dramatic. It's not forever. Just until we find a better solution. Besides, this house is falling apart. Look at those cracks in the wall. The roof leaks. You can't keep living like this. I've lived like this my whole life, Eleanor replied with dignity, and I never complained. Well, I'm complaining now, Patrice retorted, raising her voice. I'm your daughter, and I have the right to worry about you. What do you want? For us to find you dead here, alone, being eaten by animals? I can't live with that anxiety, Mum. I have my own family, my own responsibilities. Eleanor stared at her, searching those eyes for some trace of the little girl who used to hug her at night when she was afraid of the dark, of the teenager who cried on her lap when her first boyfriend left her, of the young woman who had promised she would never abandon her. But she found nothing, only a woman who was tired, annoyed, and in a hurry. And your brothers and sister? Eleanor asked, clinging to one last hope. Do they know about this? Patrice looked away. They all agree. Robert lives in Boston and can't take care of you. Mark is in California and can barely handle his own life. And Lucy, well, Lucy has 5 kids and no space for you. I'm not asking for space, Eleanor murmured. I'm just asking to be left to die where I've lived. Don't talk about dying, Patrice exclaimed, slamming the table. You'll be better off at the home. They have gardens, activities, everything, and I'll visit you every week. I promise. A lie. It was all a lie from the beginning. Eleanor had no choice but to pack her few belongings into 2 old suitcases. She put in her worn dresses, her hand-knitted shawls, the yellowed photograph of her wedding, the rosary that had belonged to her grandmother, and a tin box where she kept the letters her husband had sent her from the north before disappearing forever. She didn't take much, because Patrice told her she wouldn't need much at the home. The ride in the SUV was silent. Eleanor looked out the window as her ranch grew smaller and smaller, as the hills where she had played as a child became blurry spots on the horizon, as her entire world receded with every mile traveled. Patrice had the radio on, tuned to a modern music station that sounded like nothing but noise to Eleanor. They didn't speak during the 3-hour drive. When they arrived at the nursing home, Eleanor felt her soul drop to her feet. The building was a grey 2-story structure with bars on the first-floor windows. The garden Patrice had mentioned was barely a square of yellowed grass, with 2 cement benches and a dead tree. At the entrance, a faded sign read, Sunset Haven, home for senior adults. But it didn't look like a home. It looked like a place where people went to be forgotten. A hefty nurse with a stained uniform met them at the door. She didn't even smile. She just checked the papers Patrice handed her, nodded, and told Eleanor to follow her. Patrice gave her a quick, dry hug, without any warmth. Don't cry, Mum. It's only for a few days. I promise. I'll come see you next week, Patrice said, as she already backed away toward the SUV. She didn't look back. She didn't wait to see her mother walk into the building. She just left, kicking up a cloud of dust that seemed to swallow any trace of humanity left in that place. Eleanor was assigned a room on the 2nd floor that she shared with 3 other elderly women. The beds were rusted metal with thin mattresses that smelled of dampness. There were no curtains on the windows. There were no pictures on the walls. There was nothing to make the place feel like a home. Her roommates barely looked up when she entered. One of them, a tiny woman with completely white hair, was tied to the bed with sheets because, according to the nurse, she kept trying to escape at night. That first night, Eleanor cried silently, her face buried in the rough pillow, biting her lips to keep quiet. She didn't want the others to hear her. She didn't want to be a nuisance. Her whole life she had learned not to be a nuisance, not to ask, not to demand, to be content with the crumbs life gave her. The days in the nursing home settled into a cruel and monotonous routine. They were woken up at 6 in the morning when a nurse came in yelling and hitting the bed rails. Breakfast was always the same: watery oatmeal, a piece of stale toast, and burned coffee that tasted like dirt. At 9 came pill time, when they handed out medications that many of the seniors didn't even need, but that kept them quiet, docile, and subdued. Eleanor refused to take the pills for the first week. "I'm not sick," she told the nurse. "I don't need that." But the nurse, a young woman with cold eyes named Bernice, grabbed her arm tightly and told her, "All the old ladies here take their pills. Don't waste my time." When Eleanor continued to resist, Bernice called 2 aides who held her down while they forced the pills into her mouth and pinched her nose until she swallowed. From that day on, Eleanor learned that there was no room for dignity in this place. The director of the nursing home was a man named Garth Swanson, a heavy man in his 50s with a thick moustache and a constantly sweaty shirt. He was rarely seen. He spent most of his time in his office, counting the money families paid to keep their seniors locked up here. He charged $4,000 a month for each resident, but the food was cheap, the mattresses old, the medicine generic, and the staff minimal. The rest of the money he kept for himself, storing it in a safe everyone knew existed, but no one dared to mention. There were rumors that Garth had connections with important people in the city government, which was why no one ever inspected the home, and why he could operate with complete impunity, even though the conditions were deplorable. The seniors whispered these things in corners, afraid of being overheard, because those who complained out loud were punished. They were locked in a dark room in the basement everyone called the pit, where they were left all day without food or water until they learned to behave. Mr. Harrison, an old farmer from Tennessee, who had worked in the fields his whole life, was taken to the pit for complaining that the lunch meat was spoiled. When they took him out 12 hours later, he was pale, trembling, and never spoke another word. He sat in his chair every day, staring into space, waiting for death like one waits for the last train of the night. Eleanor watched all this with a broken heart. She saw how the seniors were treated like animals, like burdens, like human garbage that society had decided to hide so as not to have to look at it. Some had been teachers, others farmers, some merchants and housewives who had raised entire families. They all had stories, dreams that were once real, loves that had made them feel alive. But here, at Sunset Haven, none of those stories mattered. Here they were just numbers on a list, mouths to feed as little as possible, bodies to keep alive just long enough to continue collecting the monthly fee. The only person in the entire home who showed any humanity was a young woman named Lupe, a slender girl about 20 years old who worked in the kitchen and sometimes helped bathe the seniors. Lupe had sad eyes that seemed to hold her own troubles, but she always found a moment to smile, to ask how they were, to stay and chat for a while when no one was watching. One afternoon, while Lupe was helping Eleanor change her clothes, the elderly woman finally dared to ask her, "Why do you work here, dear? You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. This place is—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Lupe understood. "I need the money," Lupe replied, lowering her voice. "I have a 3-year-old son, and his father left us. I didn't finish high school. No one else wants to hire me. Here, at least, they pay me, even if it's not much. But if I could, I'd leave tomorrow. I hate seeing how they treat the residents. I hate that Mr. Swanson takes all the money while you all eat scraps. But what can I do? No one would listen to me. I'm nobody." Eleanor gently took her hand. "We are all somebody, sweetie. Never forget that. Even if the world tells you otherwise, you have worth. Your son is lucky to have you." Lupe felt tears well up in her eyes, but she held them back. She couldn't cry. She couldn't show weakness. In this place, Weakness was punished. The weeks passed, and Patrice never returned. Eleanor waited every day by the window, watching the dirt road that led to the home, praying to see that shiny SUV appear. But it never arrived. She didn't call either. The nurses told her that her daughter had paid for 6 months in advance, so there was no need for her to come. "That means she loves you," Bernice said with sarcasm. "At least she paid." But Eleanor knew the truth. Patrice had paid so she wouldn't have to come back. She had paid to silence her conscience. She had paid so she could go on with her life without the burden of an old, bothersome mother who reminded her where she came from, how much they had suffered, and how much she had sacrificed so her daughter could have that new SUV and those dark sunglasses. One night, while the other seniors slept, Eleanor pulled the photograph of her wedding from under her pillow. She looked at it under the faint light sun that filtered through the window. There she was, 22 years old, beautiful in a white dress she had sewn herself with fabric, bought with money she earned washing other people's clothes. Beside her was Thomas, her husband, tall and strong, with his hat in his hand and a shy smile on his face. They had married in the small-town church with only 20 guests because they had no money for more. But they had been happy. God, how happy they had been. Thomas was a farmhand on a nearby ranch when they met. Eleanor worked in the owner's house, cooking and cleaning. They fell in love without pretty words or impossible promises. They fell in love with stolen glances, with hands that brushed as they passed, with smiles that said everything they couldn't say out loud. When Thomas proposed, he did it on one knee in the middle of the field, without a ring, his hands dirty with soil, but his eyes full of honesty. "I have nothing to offer you," he had told her. "Only my hands to work and my heart to love you. If that is enough, marry me." And it was enough. For 8 years, it was more than enough. They had 4 children in those 8 years. First Robert, then Patrice, then Mark, and finally Lucy. They lived in a 2-room house Thomas had built with whatever wood and material he could find or was given. They had no electricity. They had no running water. But they had love. They had laughter. They had hope. Until one day, Thomas heard talk of the cotton fields in Texas, where they paid in dollars, where a man could earn in 3 months what he couldn't earn here in a year. Many men from the town were heading north, crossing the river, risking everything for an opportunity. "It's just for 1 season," Thomas told Eleanor as he packed his backpack. "I'm going to work the harvest. I'm going to save money and come back. With that, we'll be able to buy more land, maybe some cows. The kids will be able to go to school with new shoes. You'll see, honey. We'll be fine." Eleanor didn't want him to leave. She had a bad feeling, an anxiety that squeezed her chest and made it hard to breathe. But she couldn't be selfish. She couldn't ask him to stay when the possibility of a better future was within reach. "Promise me you'll come back," she said the night before he left, holding him tightly. "I promise," Thomas replied, kissing her on the forehead. "I always come back to you." But Thomas never returned. For the first few months, letters arrived. Letters written in clumsy handwriting on pages torn from a notebook, where Thomas told her about the hard work under the scorching sun, his hands bleeding from the cotton, the homesickness that killed him at night. He told her that he loved her, that he loved their children, and that he would soon have enough money to return. But after 6 months, the letters stopped coming. Eleanor waited. She waited 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. She asked all the men who returned from the north if they had seen Thomas. Some said yes, they had seen him in such and such a field, but that he had disappeared later. Others said no, they had never heard of him. Eleanor wrote letters to consulates, to churches, to any place that might give her information, but she never got any answers. In time, she had to accept the truth she didn't want to accept. Thomas was not coming back. Maybe he had died. Maybe he had drowned crossing the river on the way back. Maybe he had been deported and had no way to communicate. Maybe, and this was what hurt her most to think, he had started another family up north and had forgotten about them. But Eleanor couldn't afford to be paralyzed by grief. She had 4 children to feed, so she went to work. She washed clothes, she cooked in other people's homes, she cleaned floors, she sewed until her fingers swelled and bled. She planted a small vegetable patch in the yard. She raised chickens. She sold eggs at the market. She borrowed when there was no other choice. She skipped meals so her children could eat. She mended the same clothes over and over because there was no money for new ones. She never remarried. She never looked at another man, not because she was a saint, but because she was too tired, too busy surviving. Besides, a part of her was still waiting for Thomas to show up one day on the road, with his shy smile and a reasonable explanation for why he had taken so long. The years passed. The children grew up. Robert was the first to leave. He was barely 18 years old. He said there was no future on the ranch, that he was going to the city to find work. He promised to send money, but the remittances were irregular and kept getting smaller. Then Mark also went north, following the same path as his father, swearing that he would return with enough money for everyone. He also disappeared into the uncertain horizon of the American dream. Patrice and Lucy were the last to leave. Patrice studied at a business school thanks to the savings Eleanor had guarded, coin by coin, for years. She got a job in an office in the city, met a man with money, and married quickly. Since then, her visits became more and more sporadic. Lucy married young, too young, to a man who turned out to be an alcoholic and abusive. She had 5 children before she turned 30 and lived in such a precarious situation that Eleanor couldn't ask her for help even if she wanted to. And so, Eleanor was left alone on the ranch, alone with her memories, her pain, her silences. But she didn't complain. She never complained, because that's what she had been taught, that women like her had no right to complain, that their destiny was to suffer in silence, with dignity, without bothering anyone. Until that day in June, when Patrice showed up with her papers and her lies. Now, 3 months later, Eleanor was still sitting by that dirty window, looking out at an empty road, waiting for a daughter who wouldn't come. But something had changed inside her. A silent, contained rage was beginning to grow like weeds in the cracks of her heart. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. She had given her entire life for her children. She had given them her youth, her health, her dreams. And now, when the only thing she needed was not to die alone in a strange place, she couldn't even have that. One afternoon, while she was in the dining hall eating the watery soup that passed for lunch, she heard 2 nurses talking in low voices near the kitchen. One of them was saying, "Did you hear about the old lady in room 7? Her daughter paid for another 6 months. Imagine that. The old woman thinking they were going to take her out soon. And it turns out the family doesn't even remember her anymore. Mr. Swanson is happy, of course. More money for him." Eleanor felt the spoon fall from her hands. Patrice had paid for another 6 months. 6 more months in this hell, without even telling her, without even calling. That night, when Lupe came to collect the dinner trays, she found Eleanor sitting on her bed, staring blankly, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you all right?" Lupe asked, worried. The elderly woman looked up, and Lupe saw something in those eyes she hadn't seen before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't resignation. It was fury. An old, deep fury, the kind that accumulates over a lifetime of injustice. "No, sweetie," Eleanor replied in a firm voice. "I'm not all right. But I'm going to be. I promise you, I'm going to be." Eleanor's transformation was neither immediate nor loud. It was silent, like all true revolutions that occur in the soul of people who have been trampled for too long. Over the next few weeks, she stopped sitting by the window waiting. She stopped looking at the empty road with pleading eyes. She stopped clinging to the illusion that her daughter would come for her. Instead, she started to observe, to pay attention, to understand how this place that called itself a home but was more like a prison with yellowish walls and invisible bars really worked. She noticed that Mr. Swanson arrived every Friday afternoon in his black sedan, always well-dressed, always smelling of cologne and money. He locked himself in his office with the administrator, a skinny woman with thick glasses named Irma, and there they counted the money the families had deposited during the week. Eleanor could see them through the office window that faced the hallway, $100 and $50 bills piled on the desk as if they were dry leaves. She also noticed that the nurses rotated shifts every 8 hours, and there were specific times of day when none of them were paying attention. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when they all gathered in the break room to watch soap operas, and after 10 o'clock at night, when only one nurse was left dozing at the front desk. She observed that some seniors received better treatment than others. Those who had families who visited regularly ate larger portions, had cleaner sheets, and were not tied to their beds, even if they misbehaved. Those who were completely abandoned, like her, were treated like cattle, fed the minimum, over-medicated, and systematically ignored. And she noticed something else, something that chilled her blood. Some seniors simply disappeared. One day they were there, sitting in the dining room or wandering the hallways, and the next day their bed was empty. Their few belongings had been packed into black plastic bags, and no one spoke of them. When Eleanor asked about Mr. Harrison, the Tennessee farmer who had been locked in the pit, the nurse Bernice answered with annoyance. "He died. What did you expect? This is a nursing home, not a 5-star hotel. People die here. That's what old people do." But Eleanor had seen Mr. Harrison 2 days before his supposed death. He was weak, yes, but not dying. He coughed a lot, but he walked, and suddenly dead. With no explanation, no funeral, without anyone calling his family, if he even had one. One afternoon, Eleanor dared to ask Lupe about the disappearances. The young woman was helping her walk down the hallway, because the elderly woman's legs had weakened so much from lack of exercise and poor diet that it was hard for her to stand. "Lupe, what really happens when someone dies here?" Eleanor asked in a low voice. The girl looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then she brought her mouth close to the elderly woman's ear and whispered, "Mr. Swanson has an arrangement with a funeral home. The bodies are taken away in the early morning, without notifying the families until days later, sometimes weeks. That way he can keep collecting the monthly fee as if the resident were still alive. I've seen the receipts. I've seen how Irma changes the dates. It's theft, Mrs. Eleanor. But no one does anything because most of the families don't even come to claim the body. They don't care. They just want their valuables back, if there were any." Eleanor felt nauseous. "And the authorities? Doesn't anyone inspect this place?" Lupe gave a bitter laugh. "The city council president is Mr. Swanson's buddy. They go to church together every Sunday. Mr. Swanson donates money for the town festivals. He's untouchable. And even if someone from the state came to inspect, Mr. Swanson gets a heads up days in advance. He cleans the place up, gives the residents better food that day, hides the ones who are most sick. The inspectors come, sign some papers, have coffee and a donut, and leave. Everything goes back to the way it was." "How long have you been working here?" Eleanor asked. 2 years, Lupe replied sadly. 2 years of seeing this. 2 years of not being able to do anything. At first, I tried to complain to Irma, but she threatened to fire me. And I need this job, Mrs. Eleanor. My son needs to eat, so I keep quiet. I hate myself for it, but I keep quiet. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Don't hate yourself, sweetie. We all do what we can with the tools we have. But maybe the day will come when we can do more. Lupe looked at her with curiosity. What do you mean? I don't know yet, Eleanor admitted. But something tells me this story cannot end this way. We can't go through this life just to be discarded like trash when we are no longer useful. There has to be justice, even if it's at the end. That night, while the other seniors slept, Eleanor took the tin box where she kept Thomas's letters out of her suitcase. She had read them thousands of times over the years, until she had memorized every word, every poorly written sentence, every promise that was never fulfilled. But this time, when she took them out, something fell to the floor. An envelope that had been stuck to the bottom of the box and had come loose with the movement of the trip. Eleanor picked it up with trembling hands. She didn't recognize the handwriting on the outside. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Thomas Guerrero at an address in McAllen, Texas. The envelope had never been opened. How had it ended up in her box? Why had Thomas kept it there? Carefully, like someone opening a sacred object, Eleanor tore open the old envelope. Inside was a letter written in English. She couldn't read English, but she recognized a few words. Hospital. Accident. Dead. And there was a date. August 1982, barely 2 months after Thomas had left for the north. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she felt it would burst from her chest. For 43 years, she had lived with the uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to her husband. For 43 years, she had imagined 1,000 scenarios, that he had died, that he had abandoned her, that he had started another family. And now, in her hands, she possibly held the answer. She needed someone to translate that letter for her. But who? The nurses wouldn't do her that favor, Mr. Swanson even less. The other seniors didn't know English. Then she thought of Lupe. The girl had studied through 10th grade. Maybe she knew some English. The next morning, during breakfast, Eleanor waited for Lupe to pass near her table. When she did, the elderly woman gently touched her arm and discreetly showed her the envelope. Can you read this for me, sweetie? It's important. Lupe took the letter and read it quickly. Her expression changed from curiosity to sadness. She looked at Eleanor with eyes full of compassion and shook her head. Not here, ma'am. I'll see you in your room after lunch. The hours until lunch were endless. Eleanor could barely eat. The knot in her stomach was so big she felt like she would suffocate. When Lupe finally entered her room with the letter in her hand, the elderly woman was sitting on her bed, her hands clasped in her lap, preparing herself to hear something she knew would change her life. Lupe sat beside her and began to translate in a low voice. Dear Mr. Guerrero, we regret to inform you that the worker Thomas Guerrero passed away on August 10th, 1982, at our facility due to complications arising from a workplace accident that occurred in the cotton fields. Mr. Guerrero suffered severe heat stroke, which led to cardiac arrest. He was transported to the hospital as an emergency, where he died 5 days later without regaining consciousness. His personal belongings were sent to the address registered in his contract. We regret your loss. Signed, Management, Cottonfields, Inc. The silence that followed was absolute, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow all the oxygen in the room. Eleanor closed her eyes. She felt 43 years of doubt, of unanswered questions, of nights spent crying without knowing, finally fall into place. Thomas had not abandoned her. Thomas had not started another family. Thomas had died alone in a foreign hospital, without being able to say goodbye, without being able to send a last message, without being able to keep his promise to return. "Why didn't they ever tell us?" Eleanor murmured, her voice broken. "Why didn't this letter ever arrive? Why didn't anyone say anything to us?" Lupe shook her head. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe they sent it to the wrong address. Maybe it got lost in the mail. Maybe nobody simply cared enough to make sure it got here." Eleanor opened her eyes, and a solitary tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "My whole life I thought he had left me. My whole life I had that thorn stuck inside, and it turns out he was dead. Dead and alone. Just like I'm going to die. Just like we all die here." "Don't say that," Lupe whispered, taking her hand. "Why not?" Eleanor retorted with a mixture of pain and rage. "It's the truth. My husband died alone and abandoned in a strange country. I'm going to die alone and abandoned in this home. And my children, who have everything thanks to my sacrifice, won't even come to my funeral. Tell me, sweetie, where is the justice in that?" Lupe had no answer. She could only squeeze the elderly woman's hand and silently share her pain. That revelation changed something fundamental in Eleanor. It was as if a missing piece of her life had finally clicked into place, and although it hurt, it was also liberating. Thomas had loved her. Thomas had tried to come back. Thomas had kept his promise as much as he could. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't anyone's fault, except perhaps a cruel system that treated migrant workers as disposable tools. But it also filled her with a new rage. If Thomas had died abandoned, what had happened to his belongings, Kings? What had happened to the money he had earned during those 2 months? The letter said his personal belongings were sent to the registered address, but Eleanor had never received anything. Not a letter, not a box, nothing. She started asking questions, first to the other seniors. "Did any of you lose your husband in the States? Did you ever get his things back?" Mrs. Carmen, a 90-year-old woman who shared the room with her, nodded weakly. "My husband went to Los Angeles in 1975. He died in a construction accident. They sent me a box with his clothes and $300, but that was because my son went all the way there to claim the body. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given us anything." "And the money he had earned working?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Carmen shrugged. "We never knew. They said there was nothing, that he had spent it all. But my husband was a saver. He didn't drink, he didn't gamble. I know there was more money, but what could we do? We were poor, we didn't have lawyers, we didn't have papers, so we settled for what they gave us and kept quiet." Story after story, Eleanor uncovered a pattern. Many of the elderly women in the home were widows of migrant workers who had died in the States. Many never received fair compensation. Many were cheated by the very companies that had employed their husbands, and all had ended up here, in this forgotten home, because their children had grown tired of caring for them or simply didn't want the burden. One afternoon, while she was in the courtyard sitting under the dead tree, Eleanor saw a luxury sedan arrive. An elegant woman about 50 years old, dressed in expensive clothes and carrying a designer bag, got out of it. The woman went into the home and minutes later came out accompanied by a small, frail, elderly woman. It was Mrs. Hernandez, a woman who had arrived at the home 2 weeks before Eleanor. Eleanor watched the scene with curiosity. The elegant woman helped Mrs. Hernandez into the car, but she did it roughly, without affection. She heard snippets of the conversation. "You signed the papers, Mom. The house is officially in my name now. Now you'll stay here permanently. Don't worry about a thing." Mrs. Hernandez cried silently as she was practically pushed back into the home. The daughter didn't even stay to chat with her. She simply handed her a plastic bag with a few things and left, leaving a trail of dust and abandonment. That night, Eleanor approached Mrs. Hernandez in the dining hall. "What happened, Ma'am? Did your daughter visit?" The elderly woman's eyes were red from crying so much. "She came to make me sign papers. She took the house from me. She said it was to pay for the home, but I know that's a lie. That house is worth a lot. She's going to sell it and keep all the money, and I can't do anything here." "Didn't you read the papers before you signed?" "I can't read very well," Mrs. Hernandez admitted with shame. "She told me they were papers for the home, that I had to sign them to be able to stay here. And I believed her. I've always believed everything my children tell me. What else can I do?" Eleanor felt the rage growing inside her like fire. It wasn't just her story. It wasn't just Patrice's abandonment. It was a story repeated thousands of times across the country. Seniors stripped of their property, abandoned in homes, forgotten by children who were only waiting for the inheritance or who simply wanted to get rid of the burden. The next day, Eleanor asked Lupe to help her make a list of all the seniors in the home and their stories. Who had brought them? How long had they been there? Did they receive visits? What property had they owned before? "What do you need that for, ma'am?" Lupe asked, confused. "Because I want to understand the size of this injustice," Eleanor replied, "and because I need to know if there is anything we can do about it." Lupe hesitated, but finally agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, in their spare time, they compiled information. They discovered that out of the 52 seniors in the home, only 10 received regular visits. The rest had been abandoned. Of those 42 abandoned ones, at least 20 had been stripped of their property by their own children before being admitted. Houses, land, savings, everything had been taken from them with deception, with papers signed under pressure, or with promises that were never kept. "It's a pattern," Eleanor murmured, reviewing the list they had made on pages torn from an old notebook. "We are not isolated victims. We are part of something bigger, a system that discards the old after squeezing everything they had out of them." "And what can we do?" Lupe asked. "No one will listen to us. We are invisible." Eleanor looked her straight in the eye. "The invisible are dangerous, sweetie, because no one sees us coming." She didn't have a plan yet. She didn't know exactly what to do with that information, but for the first time in months, Eleanor felt something she had forgotten existed. Purpose. She was no longer simply waiting to die. She was waiting for the right moment to act. And that moment came sooner than she expected. One night, around 11 o'clock, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Insomnia was common among the seniors at the home, a result of anxiety, poor diet, and the pills they were given. She decided to get up and walk around the hallway a bit. She knew that at that hour there was only one nurse on duty, and usually she was asleep at the front desk. As she walked slowly, leaning on the wall, she heard voices coming from Mr. Swanson's office. The door was slightly ajar, and the light was on. Eleanor approached silently and stood by the door, listening. "We can't keep doing this, Garth. The inspections are getting stricter. If they discover the changes to the death dates, they're going to shut down the business." It was Irma's voice, the administrator. "No one is going to discover anything," Mr. Swanson replied in an annoyed tone. "I've been doing this for 10 years, and nothing has ever happened. The families don't ask. They don't care. They just want to get rid of their old folks and forget they exist." "But 4 people died last month. 4, Garth. And you kept collecting payments for 2 of them for 3 weeks longer. That's a crime." "So what? Who's going to complain? Mrs. Smith's family didn't even come to pick up her ashes. We had them here for 2 months until I threw them in the trash. And Mr. Jones didn't have any family either. His pension is still being deposited and I collect it. What's the problem? Eleanor felt her stomach turn. She was hearing confirmation of everything she had suspected. Mr. Swanson was not only negligent, he was a criminal. He was stealing the pensions of the dead, charging for services he didn't provide, discarding bodies as if they were trash. The problem is that sooner or later someone is going to talk, Irma insisted. One of the nurses, a relative, someone. The nurses are well paid to keep their mouths shut, Garth growled. And the relatives? The relatives have such dirty consciences they won't say anything because they know they are also guilty. They brought their old folks here to forget about them. They are accomplices in all this. There was a long silence. Then Irma spoke again. There's a new elderly woman, the one in room 7. Eleanor is her name. Her daughter paid a full year in advance. $12,000 in one go. But I've noticed that old woman asking questions, talking to the others, gathering information. I think she suspects something. Eleanor's heart stopped. And what can a senile old woman do? Garth scoffed. If she gets too bothersome, we increase her dose of pills and that's it. In 2 weeks she won't even know her own name. I don't know, Garth. That old woman has something in her eyes. She doesn't seem like the type to give up easily. They all give up eventually, Garth said coldly. All of them. Because in the end, they understand that no one wants them, that no one is going to defend them, that they are completely alone in this world. And when they understand that, they just go out like candles. I've seen hundreds of them die. They all die the same way, alone, forgotten, calling for children who never arrive. That Eleanor will die that way too. You'll see. Eleanor backed away from the door as fast as her weak legs would allow her. She returned to her room with her heart pounding wildly. She got into her bed and covered herself with the thin sheet, trembling with fear and rage. Now she knew everything, and they knew she suspected something. She was in danger. If she didn't do something soon, she would end up like Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith, dead and forgotten, with her pension being stolen and her body disposed of without ceremony. But Eleanor had decided something that night, listening to those cruel words. She was not going to die quietly. She was not going to die as just another number. She was going to fight. And if she had to die, at least she would die standing, with the truth in her hands and Thomas's name on her lips. The next day, when Lupe arrived for work, Eleanor intercepted her in the hallway. I need you to do me a very big favor, sweetie. I need you to get me a phone. A phone? What for? To make a call I should have made a long time ago, Eleanor replied with determination. A call that is going to change everything. Lupe looked around nervously. The hallway was empty, but the walls of this place seemed to have ears. Mrs. Eleanor, if Mr. Swanson finds out I loaned you a phone, I'll be fired, and I can't lose this job. My son. I know, sweetie, I know, Eleanor interrupted, taking her hands firmly. I'm not asking you to risk your job for no reason, but I need you to trust me. What I'm going to do will not only help me, it will help all the seniors here. And maybe, just maybe, it will help you too. Lupe hesitated. She could see something in the elderly woman's eyes that she hadn't seen in any of the other residents. Fire. A spark of life that refused to be extinguished. And after 2 years of watching seniors die in silence, of seeing injustices without being able to do anything, Lupe felt that perhaps the time had come to be brave. All right, she finally whispered, but it has to be fast. During my lunch break at 2 o'clock, there is a spot in the back courtyard where the cameras don't reach. I'll meet you there. Eleanor nodded gratefully. Thank you, sweetie. God will reward you for this. I don't believe in rewards, ma'am, Lupe replied sadly, but I do believe in doing the right thing. even if it hurts. The hours until 2 o'clock were endless. Eleanor pretended to be normal during breakfast and lunch, although inside she was a bundle of nerves. She took the pills they gave her without resisting, but as soon as the nurse turned around, she discreetly spat them into a napkin. She needed to have a clear mind for what was coming. At 2 o'clock sharp, Eleanor walked slowly toward the back courtyard. It was a neglected area of the home where no one went because there was only weeds, rubble, and a couple of rusted gas tanks. Lupe was already there, her cell phone in her hand and an anxious expression on her face. "You have 10 minutes, ma'am. No more," she said, handing her the phone. "Who are you going to call?" Eleanor held the device as if it were something sacred. It had been years since she had used a phone. On the ranch, there was no phone line, and she had never had money to buy a cell phone. "I'm going to call my daughter, Patrice. I need to hear her voice. I need to know if there is still anything left of the girl I raised." Lupe dialed the number Eleanor gave her, the only one she knew by heart, because she had seen it written on a paper Patrice had left for emergencies. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Eleanor felt her heart quicken with every ring. On the 4th ring, someone answered, but it wasn't Patrice. "Hello?" a young, bored female voice said. "Patrice?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "No, she's not here. Who is this?" I'm her mother. When will she be back?" There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Oh, it's you. Look, ma'am, Mrs. Patrice told me that if you called, I should tell you that she is very busy, that everything is fine, and not to bother her." The words fell on Eleanor like stones. "Who are you?" "I'm Jenna, the girl who works here at the house. I clean and all that. Mrs. Patrice made it very clear that I shouldn't put your calls through. She says you get very dramatic, and that's bad for her blood pressure." Eleanor felt something break inside her. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't pain, it was confirmation. Patrice had not only abandoned her, she had given specific instructions so she couldn't contact her. She had erased her own mother from her life like someone deleting an unwanted number. "Tell my daughter," Eleanor began, her voice firm and controlled, "that her mother called. Tell her I need to talk to her. It's urgent. Tell her it's about her father." "All right, Mom. I'll give her the message. But I don't think she'll call you back. You know how she is." "Yes." Eleanor knew exactly how she was. The call ended, and Eleanor returned the phone to Lupe. The young woman could see the contained tears in the elderly woman's eyes, but also something else. Determination. "She didn't call you, did she?" Lupe asked, although she already knew the answer. "No, and she won't call," Eleanor replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I won't expect anything from her now. Now I need to make another call, a more important one." "To whom?" Eleanor pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, where she had written down a number she had found in an old newspaper someone had left in the dining hall. "To a radio show, one of those where people call to report injustices." Lupe's eyes widened in surprise. "Ma'am, that is very dangerous. If Mr. Swanson finds out—" "I care very little about what Mr. Swanson does now," Eleanor interrupted. "But I need you to help me dial. I can't see the numbers well." With trembling hands, Lupe dialed the number. The phone rang several times, and finally an operator answered. "Community radio, tip line. How can we help you?" Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the moment. There was no going back. "My name is Eleanor Guerrero. I am 83 years old, and I am calling from the Sunset Haven nursing home outside of Raleigh. I need to report something very serious. They are stealing the pensions of deceased seniors here, altering death dates, mistreating residents, and discarding bodies without notifying the families. And no one does anything because the owner has connections with the city government. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then the operator said, "Ma'am, those are very serious accusations. Do you have proof of what you are saying?" "I have testimonies. I have a list of names. And I have my own eyes that have seen all of this for the last 3 months," Eleanor replied firmly. "And if you come here and ask the right questions, you will find all the proof you need." "One moment, please. I'm going to connect you with the show host." Hold music played for what felt like an eternity. Lupe nervously watched the clock on her phone. 12 minutes had already passed. She had to get back to work before anyone noticed her absence. Finally, a deep, authoritative male voice spoke on the phone. "Mrs. Eleanor, my name is Richard Benson, host of this show. I would like you to tell me your story, but I need you to be honest with me. Are you making this complaint because there are truly irregularities, or because you are upset with your family?" The question was direct, almost offensive, but Eleanor understood that the man had to be sure. He probably received hundreds of calls from resentful people making up stories. "Mr. Benson," Eleanor replied calmly, "I am upset with my family, that is true. My daughter abandoned me here, promising it would only be for a few days, and it has been 3 months without her visiting me. But that is my personal problem. What I am reporting goes beyond me. There are 52 seniors here. 42 of them have been abandoned by their families. At least 20 were stripped of their property before being admitted. And the owner of this place is stealing the pensions of those who die, altering documents, and disposing of bodies without notice. This is not the tantrum of a bitter old woman. This is a systematic crime against the most vulnerable in our society." There was another silence. Then Richard Benson said, "All right, Mrs. Eleanor, your complaint will be registered. We are going to investigate what you are telling us. But I need to warn you about something. If this gets aired, your name will be exposed. The owner of the home may retaliate against you. Do you understand the risks?" "I understand them perfectly," Eleanor replied, "and I am willing to assume them. I have nothing left to lose, Mr. Benson. No family to defend me, no health to protect, no future to safeguard. The only things I have left are my dignity and the truth, and no one is going to take those from me." "You are very brave, ma'am," the host said with respect. "I'm going to give you a contact number. If you need to contact us again, or if your situation becomes dangerous, call this number. We are going to assign a reporter to investigate the case. Stay safe." Richard dictated a number that Lupe quickly wrote down on her hand with a pen. Then the call ended. Eleanor returned the phone to Lupe, and both stood there, among the weeds and rubble, processing what had just happened. They had crossed a line. There was no turning back. "Ma'am, what did we just get ourselves into?" Lupe whispered fearfully. "A war, sweetie," Eleanor replied. "A war we may not win, but at least we will fight." The next 2 weeks were an anxious wait. Eleanor didn't know if the radio show would actually do anything, or if her call had been filed away along with hundreds of other complaints that would never go anywhere. Meanwhile, she had to act normal, take her pills or pretend to, eat her terrible food, sleep in her uncomfortable bed, and above all, not raise suspicion. But Mr. Swanson was not stupid. One afternoon, while Eleanor was sitting in the dining hall, the man approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor, how is life treating you?" he asked with false cordiality. "As always, Mr. Swanson," she replied without looking him in the eyes. "I've been told you are asking questions," the man continued, sitting heavily in the chair opposite her. "Asking about the other residents, about their families, about their stories. May I know why you are so interested? Eleanor felt fear gripping her throat, but she didn't show it. I'm just chatting, Mr. Swanson. At my age, other people's stories are the only things we have left to entertain ourselves. He murmured, observing her suspiciously. Well, I just wanted to remind you that this is a peaceful place. We don't want any trouble. We don't want the residents getting agitated with things from the past. That's why we give them their medicine, you know, so they can be calm, without anxiety, without worries. Do you understand me? The message was clear. Stop asking questions, or we will drug you until you can't even think. I understand you perfectly, Mr. Swanson, Eleanor replied with a smile that hid all the rage she felt. Don't worry about me. I'm just an old lady who misses talking. Good, good, he said, getting up. I'm glad we're clear. You know, your daughter paid very well for your stay here. It would be a shame if something happened to you, or if we had to, let's say, adjust your treatment when Mr. Swanson walked away. Eleanor felt her hands trembling. The threat had been veiled, but real. She was in danger. She had to be more careful. That night, while the other seniors slept, Eleanor took out the list she had made with Lupe. Names, dates, stories. It was her only proof that something terrible was happening in that place. She decided to hide it inside her mattress, in a small hole she had discovered. It wasn't the best hiding spot, but it was better than nothing. She also took out the letter about Thomas's death. She read it again, although she already knew it by heart. And suddenly something caught her attention. At the bottom of the letter, almost erased by time, was a line that said, "Compensation pending, 2,500 USD. Compensation? What compensation? The next day, she asked Lupe if she could search the internet for what that meant. The young woman waited until her lunch break and searched for information about compensation for workplace deaths in the United States. Ma'am, Lupe said, her eyes wide. In the States, when a worker dies on the job, the company has to pay compensation to the family. In 1982, $2,000 was a lot of money. Today it would be equivalent to… Wait, let me do the conversion. It would be like $7,500, more than 150,000 pesos. Eleanor felt her breath catch. And I never received anything? How is that possible? Maybe they never knew how to contact you, Lupe suggested. Or maybe someone kept that money. Who? Who could have kept that money? Lupe shook her head. I don't know, Ma'am. More than 40 years have passed. It would be almost impossible to find out now. But Eleanor couldn't let go of the thought. 43 years of poverty. 43 years raising her children alone, working until her skin was raw, going hungry, wearing mended clothes, living in a house that was falling apart. And all that time, there had been money that belonged to her. Compensation for her husband's death, money with which she could have given her children a better life, money with which she could have had a dignified old age. The rage she felt at that moment was like an all-consuming fire. The next day, something unexpected happened. A man arrived at the home asking for Eleanor Guerrero. He was young, about 30 years old, with glasses and a camera hanging from his neck. The nurse, Bernice, told him he couldn't see any resident without the director's permission, but the man insisted. I'm a reporter from community radio. We have a complaint about irregularities in this home, and I need to speak with Mrs. Eleanor Guerrero. Bernice panicked. She immediately called Mr. Swanson, who came running from his office, his face red with fury. Who gave you permission to come here? He yelled at the reporter. This is a private place. You can't just walk in like this. It is a place that receives public funds, Because several of its residents receive government pensions, the reporter replied calmly. And we have reasons to believe those pensions are being mishandled. Now, either you let me speak with Mrs. Eleanor voluntarily, or I will return with a court order and a police car. You decide. Mr. Swanson was trembling with rage, but he knew he had no choice. If he refused the reporter, it would confirm that he had something to hide. 5 minutes, he growled, and with a nurse present. Eleanor was taken to a small room that was usually used for families to visit their seniors privately. The reporter, who introduced himself as David Nelson, sat across from her with a recorder in his hand. Bernice stood in a corner, her arms crossed and a grim expression on her face. Mrs. Eleanor, David began, were you the one who called our tip line 2 weeks ago? Yes, it was me, Eleanor replied, looking him directly in the eyes. And do you stand by everything you said? Are you willing to repeat it on camera? Yes. Do you understand that this could cause you problems? Yes, David nodded. Good. I need you to tell me exactly what you have seen here, with details, with names, if possible. For the next 20 minutes, while Bernice listened increasingly nervously, and Mr. Swanson waited outside like a caged lion, Eleanor told everything. She spoke of Mr. Harrison and his mysterious disappearance. She spoke of Mrs. Smith, whose ashes were thrown in the trash. She spoke of the pension that continued to be collected for deceased seniors. She spoke of the terrible food, the forced pills, the dark room in the basement. She spoke of seniors stripped of their property by their own families just before being admitted. And as she spoke, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The power of truth. The power of being heard. The power to matter. When she finished, David put away his recorder and thanked her. Mrs. Eleanor, what you have just told me is very serious. I am going to need time to investigate, to get documents, to talk to other people. But I promise you that I will do everything possible to make this story public. I only ask one thing of you, Eleanor said. Don't forget about us. We are invisible to the world. Our families abandoned us. The government ignores us. Society discards us. But we are still people. We still have dignity. And we deserve to be treated as human beings, not as trash. David's eyes were moist when he left the room. He had gone in expecting to find just another story of abuse in a nursing home, but he had found something much bigger. The reflection of a society that had lost respect for its elders. When he left, Mr. Swanson entered the room where Eleanor still sat, furious. "What did you tell him?" he roared. "The truth," she replied calmly. "You stupid old woman," he spat. "Do you think anything will happen? Do you think anyone will believe you? You're an old woman in a nursing home. No one takes you seriously. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to my buddy, the city council president, and this will disappear as if it never happened. And you," he pointed his finger at her, "you are going to regret having opened your mouth." That night, Mr. Swanson ordered Eleanor's sedative dose to be increased. When Bernice came with the pills, she brought double the usual amount. "Director's orders," she said with a malicious smile, "so you can sleep better." But Eleanor had already learned the trick. She put the pills in her mouth, drank the water, waited for Bernice to leave, and then spat them out into her hand. She saved them in a napkin and flushed them down the toilet. She wasn't going to let them drug her, not now that she had finally found the courage to fight. The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a mental clarity she hadn't had in months. And that's when she realized something. The entire time she had been taking those pills, her mind had been clouded, her thoughts confused, her will weakened. It wasn't just her age. It was the medication. They were keeping her doped up on purpose so she wouldn't cause problems. She told this to Lupe. who confessed something that had been weighing on her conscience. "Ma'am, those pills they give you are not necessary medicines. They are strong tranquilizers. Mr. Swanson buys them in bulk because they are cheap. They give everyone the same thing regardless of whether they need it or not. It's to keep you quiet, docile, half asleep. It's easier to control you that way." And the nurses know. They all know, but no one says anything. The one who talks loses their job. Eleanor felt a mixture of horror and determination. They were not only being mistreated and robbed, they were being chemically controlled. It was one crime after another, one violation after another of their most basic human rights. "Lupe," Eleanor said, taking the young woman's hands, "I need you to help me with one more thing. I know you have risked a lot for me already, but this is important. Could you get me copies of the medical records of the residents who have died here? Or at least photographs? We need proof that the dates of death have been altered." Lupe turned pale. "Ma'am, those records are in Irma's office. It's always locked. If they discover me in there, they won't just fire me. They could put me in jail." "I know, and you don't have to do it. You've already done too much. But if we want things to truly change, we need evidence that can't be ignored. Testimonies can be dismissed, but documents, altered dates, that is concrete evidence." Lupe remained silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "Let me think about it. It's just, I'm so afraid, Ma'am. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of them hurting my son. Afraid of everything." "Fear is what they want you to feel, sweetie," Eleanor said with wisdom, "because fear paralyzes us. It makes us accomplices to what is wrong because we don't dare to do what is right. I spent 40 years of my life in fear. Fear of complaining, fear of asking for help, fear of being a nuisance. And look where I ended up. Alone, abandoned, waiting for death in this horrible place. I don't want you to end up like that. I don't want you to look back in 40 years and regret not having been brave when you had the chance." Tears were in Lupe's eyes. "And what if they discover us? What if all this is in vain?" "Then at least we will have tried," Eleanor replied. "And that is more than most people can say." 3 days later, in the early morning of a Friday, when most of the seniors were fast asleep under the effect of the sedatives and only one nurse was on the night shift, Lupe made the bravest decision of her life. She had gotten a copy of Irma's office key weeks ago, when the administrator had sent her to fetch some documents and had left her keychain on the desk for a moment. Lupe had taken the office key, rushed to the corner hardware store during her lunch break, made a quick copy, and returned the original before Irma noticed its absence. She had kept that copy at the bottom of her backpack for weeks, not knowing exactly why, just feeling that she might need it someday. That day had arrived. At 2:00, 30 minutes in the morning, when the nurse on duty was asleep at the front desk, with her mouth open and a thread of drool falling from the corner of her lips, Lupe walked silently toward Irma's office. Her hands were shaking so much that it was difficult to put the key in the lock. The click of the bolt sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the night, but no one woke up. She went in quickly and closed the door behind her. She couldn't turn on the lights because they would be visible from the hallway, so she used her phone's flashlight. The beam of light illuminated Irma's cluttered desk, the piles of papers, the folders with loose labels, the wall calendar with annotations in red. Lupe knew she had to be fast. She searched through the filing cabinets until she found one labeled Deaths 1924 to 1925. She opened it carefully and began pulling out files, photographing each page with her phone. Her hands were still shaking, which made some of the photos blurry, but she didn't have time to retake them. The files told a chilling story. Mrs. Jane Smith, real date of death, according to the hospital certificate, March 12th. Date reported to the family, April 5th. Almost a month's difference. During that month, Mr. Swanson had continued to collect her monthly pension of $4,000. Mr. John Jones died January 8th, reported as deceased February 3rd. 4 more weeks of stolen pension. Mr. William Harrison, the Tennessee farmer, died February 20th. Never reported because he had no known family, his government pension of $5,200 a month was still being collected. Lupe quickly did the math in her head. 8 months multiplied by 5,200, more than $40,000 stolen from a single dead senior. And the list went on. Page after page of altered dates, stolen pensions, deceived families. It was exactly what Eleanor had reported, but now there was irrefutable proof. Lupe was photographing the last file when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. She quickly put the papers back in the filing cabinet, closed the drawer without making a sound, and hid under the desk just as the office door opened. Someone turned on the light. Lupe held her breath, making herself as small as possible under the desk, praying that whoever it was wouldn't come too close. "The darn old lady fell asleep again," a voice Lupe recognized as Bernice's muttered. "I'm going to report her to Mr. Swanson. This is the 3rd time this month." Bernice walked around the office looking for something. She opened some drawers, moved papers, cursed under her breath. Lupe could see her white nurse's shoes inches from where she was hiding. If Bernice bent down even a little, she would be discovered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Bernice found what she was looking for, a folder with medications, and left the office, turning off the light. Lupe waited a full 5 minutes before daring to come out of her hiding place. Her legs were numb, and her back hurt from the awkward position, but she had gotten the photos. She had the evidence. She left the office with the same care with which she had entered, locked the door, and walked back to the utility room where she kept her things. There, with her hands still trembling from adrenaline and fear, she checked the photos on her phone. She had managed to photograph 17 complete files, 17 cases of altered dates, stolen pensions, and deceived families. The next morning, when Lupe's shift began, she found Eleanor awake and waiting anxiously. The young woman gave her a discreet signal, and they met in the women's restroom, the only place they could talk with some privacy. "I got it," Lupe whispered, showing her the phone. "I have photos of everything. The altered dates, the names, everything." Eleanor looked at the photos with tears in her eyes. "You are very brave, sweetie, much braver than I was at your age. Now we have to get this to the reporter," Lupe said. "Do you have the number he gave you?" Eleanor pulled the crumpled piece of paper with David Nelson's number written on it from her bra. They had decided to keep it there because it was the last place the nurses would look. Lupe called from her phone. David answered on the second ring. "Mr. Nelson, this is Lupe. I work at the home where you interviewed Mrs. Eleanor. I have proof, photographs of files that show exactly what she reported. Can we meet?" There was a moment of silence. Then David said, "How solid is this proof?" "Very solid. They are official documents from the home that show altered death dates and pensions collected after the deaths." "This is gold," David murmured. "This is exactly what I needed. Can you send me the photos via text message?" "No," Eleanor interrupted, taking the phone. "Nothing over the internet. Mr. Swanson has contacts everywhere. It wouldn't be unusual for him to be able to intercept messages. We need to meet in person." David understood the caution. "All right. There's a church 2 miles from the home, St. Joseph's Parish. Can you meet there tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? It's mass time. There will be people. No one will suspect. I can go, Lupe said. But Mrs. Eleanor cannot leave the home. The seniors are not allowed to leave without written authorization from the family. Then you go, Eleanor said. Take the photos to him. And take him this, too. She pulled the letter about Thomas's death from her pocket. This letter proves that 43 years ago, I should have received compensation for my husband's death. I never received it. I want him to investigate what happened to that money. I want to know who kept it. The next day, Lupe asked permission to leave work early, inventing a story that her son was sick and she had to take him to the doctor. Irma grumbled, but gave her permission. At 5 o'clock sharp, Lupe was sitting on one of the back benches of St. Joseph's Parish, her backpack on her lap and her heart pounding. David arrived 5 minutes later, dressed discreetly without his camera or anything that would identify him as a reporter. He sat beside her, and they pretended to pray while speaking in whispers. Do you have them? Lupe discreetly handed him her phone. David quickly reviewed the photos, his eyes widening with each image. This is incredible. It's exactly what I needed. Can I keep the photos? Copy them to yours, but I need my phone back. It's the only one I have. David took out his own phone and began transferring the images via Bluetooth. While he did so, Lupe handed him the letter about Thomas. Mrs. Eleanor wants you to investigate this, too. She never received the compensation she was due for her husband's death. She wants to know what happened. David read the letter, frowning. This is going to be harder to investigate. More than 40 years have passed. But I'll try. I know someone at the US consulate who can help me search old archives. When he finished copying the photos, he returned the phone to Lupe. Now comes the hard part. I'm going to publish this story. It's going to be big, very big. And when it comes out, there will be consequences. Mr. Swanson is not going to stand by. I need you to promise me you will look out for Mrs. Eleanor. If you feel you are in danger, call me immediately. I will, Lupe promised. One more thing, David added. I need more testimonies. Mrs. Eleanor is credible, but if I could speak with other seniors at the home, with other families who have been affected, that would strengthen the story. There's a lady, Mrs. Carmen. She lost her husband in the States too. And there's Mrs. Hernandez, whose daughter stole her house. They could speak. Perfect. Do you think you can arrange for me to talk to them? Perhaps during another visit to the home, but this time more formally with cameras, so Mr. Swanson can't refuse. Lupe nodded. I'll try. They said their goodbyes discreetly, and each left the church through different doors. Lupe returned to the home feeling a mixture of fear and hope. They had taken a giant step, but now came the most dangerous part. Waiting. Over the next few days, Eleanor noticed that the surveillance on her had increased. Bernice watched her constantly. Mr. Swanson spent more time in the hallways, looking at everyone with suspicion. Irma had started asking the other seniors about what they talked about with Eleanor. They're nervous, Eleanor told Lupe during one of their secret meetings. They know something is brewing, but they don't know exactly what. That makes them dangerous. And she was right. One evening, Mr. Swanson gathered all the nurses in his office. Lupe could hear parts of the conversation from the hallway. That damn reporter is snooping around. I need you to be alert. If anyone asks strange questions, notify me immediately. And that old woman, Eleanor, don't let her out of your sight for a second. If she gets too problematic, you know what to do. The next day, Mrs. Carmen woke up dead. They found her in her bed, her eyes open and an expression of terror frozen on her face. The nurses said it was a heart attack. Natural, expected at her age. But Eleanor had spoken with Mrs. Carman the night before, and the lady was fine. Weak, yes, but not dying. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Had it really been natural? Or had Mr. Swanson decided to silence a potential witness? She had no way to prove it. There was no autopsy. The body was collected that same afternoon by the funeral home with which Mr. Swanson had an agreement. Everything very fast. Everything very convenient. Eleanor told Lupe her suspicions. The young woman turned pale. "Mum, if Mr. Swanson is capable of doing something like that, then you are in serious danger. Maybe we should—" "What? Give up now?" Eleanor interrupted. "No, sweetie. We've come too far. If Mrs. Carman died because of this, then we have to make sure her death is not in vain." But the fear was real and palpable. Eleanor began taking precautions. She asked Lupe to hide the list of names in a safe place outside the home. She stopped drinking any beverage or eating any food that she hadn't seen prepared with her own eyes. She slept with one eye open, alert for any strange sound. And then, 1 week after Mrs. Carman's death, David Nelson returned to the home. But this time he didn't come alone. He was accompanied by a cameraman, a producer, and a lawyer from a human rights organization. Mr. Swanson tried to deny them entry, but David had all the necessary permits. He had gotten an order from the State Human Rights Commission that allowed him access to the home to investigate the complaints of mistreatment. "You can enter," Mr. Swanson said through gritted teeth. "But everything you film here will be reviewed by my lawyer, and if you defame my business, I will sue you until you're left on the street." "We are only looking for the truth," David replied calmly. "If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." For the next 3 hours, David's team toured the entire home. They filmed the rooms with their rusted beds and stained mattresses. They filmed the dining hall with its cold, stale food. They filmed the communal restroom with its topless toilets and no hot water. They filmed everything and interviewed the seniors. One by one, they told their stories, some with fear, constantly looking toward where Mr. Swanson was watching like a vulture, others with courage, taking advantage of that unique opportunity to be heard. Mr. Arthur, a 92-year-old farmer from Oklahoma, tearfully recounted how his children had sold his farm without his permission and locked him up here to keep the money. Mrs. Hernandez showed the papers she had signed without understanding, the documents that had stolen her house. Mr. Thomas, an old teacher from Pennsylvania, spoke of how they forced him to take pills that left him like a zombie, unable to think or protest. And finally, they interviewed Eleanor. They seated her in front of the cameras in the home's small, withered garden. The afternoon sun hit her face, making her tired eyes shine with a special intensity. And there, in front of the camera, in front of the country, Eleanor told her story. She spoke of Thomas and how he had died alone in a foreign country. She spoke of the compensation she never received and the 43 years of poverty that followed. She spoke of how she had raised her 4 children alone, working until her fingers were raw. She spoke of Patrice and the broken promise. "Don't cry. It's only for a few days." "It has been 3 months since my daughter left me here," Eleanor said, looking directly into the camera. 3 months without a visit, without a call. She paid for a year in advance so she wouldn't have to worry about me, so she wouldn't have to feel guilty. And I have spent these 3 months watching how they treat the seniors here. Like animals, like trash. They drug us to keep us quiet. They steal our pensions. They leave us to die alone and discard our bodies without dignity. Her voice broke, but she didn't cry. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. "I know I'll probably die here," she continued. "I know my daughter will never come for me. I know that when I die, Mr. Swanson will keep collecting my pension until he can no longer hide my death. And I know my body will probably end up in an unmarked grave. But I don't care. Because if my story, if all of our stories, serve to change this so that other seniors don't suffer what we have suffered, then it was worth it. She paused and looked directly at the camera, as if she could see through it to every person who would be watching this. And if my daughter, Patrice, is watching this, I want her to know something. I forgive you. I forgive your lie. I forgive your abandonment. Because holding a grudge is a poison that only poisons me. But I also want you to know that you are going to have to live with this for the rest of your life. You are going to have to explain to your children, if you have any, why you abandoned your mother. And when you are old, when you need help and care, you will remember this moment. And I hope that then you will understand the damage you did. When the interview ended, there was absolute silence in the garden. Even the cameraman had tears in his eyes. Mr. Swanson, who had been watching from the doorway, turned and stormed into the building in a fury. He knew he was lost. He knew that when that interview aired, his whole world would collapse. That night, after David's team left, Mr. Swanson gathered his nurses. Lupe could hear from the hallway. That cursed old woman just sank all of us. When this airs on TV, inspectors will come, police, everyone. They're going to check every document, every record. They're going to find everything, everything. What are we going to do? Irma asked, her voice trembling. There was a long silence. Then Mr. Swanson said something that chilled Lupe's blood. We are going to do what we should have done from the beginning. We are going to make that old woman stop being a problem. Forever. Lupe didn't wait to hear more. She ran to Eleanor's room and woke her up urgently. Ma'am, we have to get you out of here. Mr. Swanson plans to hurt you. Tonight! Eleanor sat up in her bed. Her mind worked quickly despite her age. We can't leave through the front door. There's a nurse on guard. There's a window in the laundry room, Lupe said. It faces the back courtyard. From there we can jump the fence. It's not very tall. And then? My house is 2 miles from here. You can stay there tonight. Tomorrow we call David and the police. It was risky. Eleanor could barely walk without help. The window was high. The fence, too. But staying was more dangerous. All right, Eleanor said. Let's do it. She quickly dressed in the little she had. She put the photograph of her wedding, her grandmother's rosary, and the letter about Thomas in her bag. She didn't need anything else. Lupe helped her walk silently through the dark hallways. Every creak of the floor seemed like thunder, every shadow a threat. Finally, they reached the laundry room. The window was closed but unlocked. Lupe opened it carefully. The cold night air rushed in like a sigh of freedom. Outside, the full moon illuminated the back courtyard with a silvery light. I'll go first, Lupe whispered. Then I'll help you down. She climbed onto the windowsill and jumped. It was only about 5 feet high, but in the darkness it seemed more. She landed well and looked up. Your turn, Ma'am. Eleanor looked at the window. Her 83 years weighed on her like mountains. Her knees barely supported her. Her hands trembled. But in her heart, a fire burned that no age could extinguish. With a superhuman effort, she climbed onto the windowsill. Lupe held out her arms from below. Just drop. I'll catch you. Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought of Thomas. She thought of all the seniors who had died alone and forgotten in this place. She thought of the dignity that had been taken from her for so long, and she jumped. The impact was harder than she expected. Lupe caught her as best she could, but they both fell to the ground in a scramble of arms and legs. Eleanor felt a sharp pain in her left ankle, but she didn't scream. She couldn't scream. She bit her lip until it bled and let Lupe help her up. "Are you all right?" the young woman whispered. "Yes," Eleanor lied. Her ankle was throbbing, but it didn't matter. They had to keep going. Limping and leaning on Lupe, they crossed the back courtyard. The fence was at the back, covered in dry vines and patches of dampness. It was taller than it had looked from the window, maybe 8 feet. For an 83-year-old woman with an injured ankle, it was like the Everest. But they had no other option. Lupe found some cinder blocks piled up near the fence. She arranged them to make a kind of makeshift ladder. She climbed up first, sat on top of the fence, and extended her hand toward Eleanor. "Come on, ma'am, slowly, I'll pull you up." Eleanor began to climb. Every movement was agony. Her ankles screamed, her knees creaked, her arms trembled, but she kept climbing step by step, breath by breath. Until finally she felt Lupe's hand gripping hers. Almost there. A little more. Just as Eleanor was about to reach the top of the fence, they heard voices inside the home. "She escaped! The old woman from room 7 escaped!" It was Bernice's voice, hysterical and furious. "Search for her! She can't have gone far!" Mr. Swanson roared. Lights turned on all over the building. Eleanor and Lupe froze on the fence, like deer caught in headlights. "Hurry!" Lupe urged. "Climb down the other side." But climbing down was even harder than climbing up. There were no blocks on this side. It was a straight jump. Lupe climbed down first and extended her arms. "Let go, I'll catch you." Eleanor let herself fall. She fell onto Lupe, and they both tumbled onto the ground. The pain in her ankle was now unbearable, but there was no time to think about it. They could hear Mr. Swanson and the nurses coming out into the back courtyard. "Here! They climbed the fence!" someone shouted. Lupe pulled Eleanor up. "Run! Run as fast as you can!" And they ran. Or rather, Eleanor hobbled as fast as she could while Lupe practically carried her. Behind them, they heard the sound of people climbing the fence, of footsteps chasing them, of furious shouts. Lupe's house was 2 miles away, but they wouldn't be able to make it. Not at this pace. Eleanor knew it. Her body was at its limit. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt it would burst from her chest. Her lungs burned. Her legs threatened to buckle at any moment. "Leave me," she gasped. "You go. Save yourself." "Don't even dream of it," Lupe replied, tightening her grip. "Either we both get out, or neither of us does." They ran through dark, empty streets. It was past midnight, and the neighborhood was asleep. No one saw them. No one heard them. They turned one corner and then another, trying to confuse their pursuers. Finally, when they couldn't take another step, Lupe dragged Eleanor toward an abandoned construction site. It was a half-finished house, with only the cinder block walls and a few metal beams poking up into the sky. They hid behind a pile of cement bags, covered in dust and darkness. Eleanor was trembling from pain and exhaustion. Lupe hugged her, trying to silence her ragged breathing. They could hear voices in the distance. Mr. Swanson and his nurses were still looking for them. "They have to be around here," Mr. Swanson's voice growled. "A disabled old woman can't have gotten far." "Maybe we should call the police," Irma suggested. "Are you crazy? If we call the police, they'll start asking questions. They'll want to know why she escaped." "No, we have to find them ourselves." The footsteps got closer. Closer, closer. Eleanor closed her eyes and prayed silently. After everything that had happened, she couldn't end up like this. Not when she was so close to getting justice. The footsteps passed by. The voices faded away. Slowly, silence returned to the night. Eleanor and Lupe stayed hidden there for what seemed like an eternity, not daring to move, not daring to even breathe. Only when the first glow of dawn began to paint the sky, orange, did Lupe dare to peek out. "They're gone," she whispered. "I think they gave up." She helped Eleanor up. The elderly woman could barely walk. Her ankle was swollen and purple. But they had survived. They had escaped. They reached Lupe's house just as the sun was rising. It was a humble, two-room house in a poor neighborhood with unfinished block walls and a metal roof. But to Eleanor, at that moment, it was a palace. Lupe helped Eleanor sit on the living room's only armchair. She put ice on her ankle and gave her water. Then she called David Nelson. The reporter answered in a sleepy voice. "Hello, Mr. Nelson. This is Lupe. Mrs. Eleanor and I just escaped from the home. Mr. Swanson tried to hurt us. We need help." David woke up immediately. "Where are you?" "At my house." She gave him the address. "Don't move. I'm coming there, and I'm bringing the police." Half an hour later, 2 police cars and David's SUV arrived at Lupe's house. The officers took statements from both women. Eleanor, despite the pain and exhaustion, told everything with astonishing clarity. The officers sounded increasingly serious, taking notes, exchanging meaningful glances. "Ma'am, what you are describing are serious crimes," the officer in charge said. "Fraud, alteration of documents, mistreatment, possibly even homicide. We are going to need you to come with us to file a formal complaint." "I will," Eleanor replied firmly. "I will do whatever is necessary." David had been filming the entire conversation. Now he approached Eleanor and knelt in front of her. "Mrs. Eleanor, the interview I did with you yesterday is going to air tonight on national news. Millions of people are going to hear your story. There is going to be a huge scandal. Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor looked him in the eyes. "I have lived 83 years in the shadows, Mr. Nelson. Invisible, forgotten. I think it's time for the world to see me." That night, at 10 o'clock, the report aired on the most watched news program in the country. For 25 minutes, the entire nation saw the images of the Sunset Haven nursing home. They saw the seniors in their rusted beds, they saw the stale food, they saw the dirty restrooms, and they heard the stories. But above all, they heard Eleanor. Her wrinkled face filled the screens of millions of homes. Her words, loaded with pain but also with dignity, resonated in the conscience of a nation that had forgotten its elders. "Don't cry. It's only for a few days," Eleanor repeated, looking into the camera. "That's what my daughter told me, and I believed her, just as I've believed the people who are supposed to love me my whole life. But here I am, 3 months later, still waiting for those few days to end." The impact was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded. Justice for Eleanor became a national trending topic. Thousands of people shared their own stories of abandoned seniors, horrible homes, and families who had disappeared after leaving their parents at homes. The next morning, inspectors from the State Human Rights Commission, the Department of Health, and the District Attorney's Office arrived at the Sunset Haven nursing home with search warrants. Mr. Swanson tried to prevent them from entering, but he was immediately arrested for obstruction of justice. What they found inside was worse than Eleanor had described. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, they found a room full of files of seniors who had died, but whose pensions were still being collected. Some had been dead for more than 2 years. They also found Mr. Swanson's safe. It contained more than $2 million in cash, the product of years of systematic theft. Irma, the administrator, was arrested while trying to flee with several files under her arm. Bernice and 2 other nurses were also detained. All of them began talking, blaming each other, trying to save their own skin. The scandal grew. The city council president who had protected Mr. Swanson was forced to resign. Investigations into other nursing homes in the state began. It was discovered that the problem was much bigger than anyone had imagined. While all this was happening, Eleanor was in the hospital. Her ankle required surgery. Doctors also found severe malnutrition, anemia, and liver damage, likely caused by the sedatives she had been given for months. But her spirit was not broken. From her hospital bed, Eleanor received visits from reporters, lawyers, and human rights activists. Everyone wanted to hear her story. Everyone wanted to help. And then, 1 week after the scandal, she received an unexpected visit. Patrice entered the hospital room, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She wore the same expensive clothes, the same dark sunglasses, but now she looked smaller, more fragile, as if the weight of her guilt had shrunk her. She stood by the door, not daring to enter completely. "Mom," she whispered. Eleanor looked at her. For 3 months, she had imagined this moment. She had imagined shouting at her, accusing her, demanding explanations. But now that Patrice was there, in front of her, the only thing she felt was a deep sadness. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did you do this to me?" Patrice started to cry. It was not a delicate, elegant cry. It was an ugly, broken sob from someone finally facing the magnitude of their betrayal. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I don't know, Mom. At first it was because I was ashamed that my friends knew my mum lived on a ranch without electricity. I was ashamed to take you to my new house because I thought you would, I don't know, look out of place, make my neighbors think I came from poverty." "But you did come from poverty," Eleanor said calmly. "I raised you in poverty. I fed you with my calloused hands. I sent you to school with the money I earned washing other people's clothes. What are you ashamed of? Of me or of yourself?" Patrice sank into the chair next to the bed. "Of myself. Always of myself. Because every time I saw you, I remembered everything you sacrificed, and that made me feel guilty for living well while you were still on that ranch. So I stopped seeing you, and the longer time passed, the harder it was to come back. And when I finally came for you, I had already decided that it was easier to leave you at the home than to face everything I felt." "And what did you feel?" "Guilt, shame, fear. Fear that you would ask to live with me. Fear that my husband would be annoyed. Fear that my children would see you as a burden. I'm a coward, Mom. I've been a coward my whole life, and now the whole country knows it. My picture is in all the newspapers. They are calling me the cruel daughter. I was fired from my job. My friends no longer speak to me. My husband left me. He said he couldn't be married to someone so despicable." Eleanor listened to all this without any expression on her face. When Patrice finished, there was a long silence. "Did you come to ask for forgiveness? Or did you come to ask for pity?" Eleanor finally asked. Patrice blinked, surprised by the question. I don't know. Because if you came to ask for pity, you came to the wrong person. I have no pity left for anyone. I used it all up on myself during 3 months in that hell." Eleanor sat up in bed, ignoring the pain in her ankle. "But if you came to ask for forgiveness, with honesty, without expecting anything in return, then I want you to know something. I already forgave you." Patrice's eyes widened in surprise. "What?" "I already forgave you. I did it at the home, when I realized that holding a grudge only hurt me more. I forgave you not because you deserve it, but because I needed to free myself from that poison." Eleanor paused. "But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean things can go back to how they were before. You broke something, daughter, something that cannot be repaired with apologies." "I know," Patrice murmured. "Is there anything I can do?" Yes, you can learn from this. You can be better. And if you ever have children, you can teach them that the elderly are not a burden. They are teachers. They hold the memory of everything we were as a family, as a society, and they deserve to end their days with dignity and love. Patrice nodded through her tears. Can I visit you again? Eleanor thought about it for a moment. You can, but don't do it out of obligation or guilt. Do it only if you truly want to, because I no longer need crumbs of affection. I no longer need empty promises. If you are going to be in my life, you have to be here for real, or better not be here at all. I will try, Patrice promised. I will try to be the daughter I should have always been. After Patrice left, Eleanor remained looking out the hospital window. She felt no triumph. She felt no revenge. She only felt a strange peace, like when a storm ends and the air smells of wet earth and new possibilities. The following days brought more surprises. David Nelson returned with news about his investigation into Thomas's death. He had contacted the US consulate and, with the help of a lawyer, had managed to track the compensation the cotton company should have paid in 1982. The money, $2,500, had been sent to an address in the country, but it wasn't Eleanor's address. It was the address of a man named Ellis Guerrero, who had identified himself as the older brother and only living relative of Thomas Guerrero. Eleanor felt the world stop. Ellis, Thomas's older brother, an ambitious and unscrupulous man who had never gotten along with his family, a man who had disappeared from the town right after Thomas's death. "Where is he now?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "He died 10 years ago," David replied. "But before he died, he had accumulated a considerable fortune. He had loan-sharking businesses with abusive interest. He had property, and according to the records, it all started with an inheritance he received in 1982. The inheritance he had stolen from her, the money from Thomas's death. It was too late to recover that money, but at least now Eleanor knew the truth. Thomas had not abandoned her. The compensation for his death existed, but it was stolen by his own brother, a thief who lived well at the expense of the pain of a widow and 4 orphans. But there was more news, and this was much better. The $2 million found in Mr. Swanson's safe were confiscated by the district attorney's office. A judge ruled that the money should be distributed among all the families of the seniors who had been robbed. Eleanor would receive approximately $150,000 as compensation. It was not the fortune that had been stolen from her 43 years ago, but it was something. It was justice, even if it arrived late. In addition, a human rights organization offered to pay all her medical expenses and help her find dignified housing. When she was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks later, Eleanor did not return to the ranch. She did not return with Patrice. She decided to stay in a small house the human rights organization had found for her on the outskirts of the city. It was modest, but comfortable. It had electricity. It had running water. It had a small garden where she could plant herbs. And most importantly, it had dignity. Lupe visited her every day. The young woman had quit the home, which was permanently closed anyway, and now worked at a community clinic. She earned a little more and had more reasonable hours. She could spend more time with her son. "Everything is thanks to you, ma'am," Lupe told her every time she visited. "You were brave when I was afraid. You taught me that we cannot stay silent in the face of injustice." "You were brave too, sweetie," Eleanor replied. "Braver than me, because you had something to lose. I had nothing left." "That's not true. You had your life, and you risked it anyway." The two had become more than friends. They had become family. The months passed. The case against Mr. Swanson and his accomplices advanced slowly through the judicial system, but it was advancing. Everyone faced serious charges, and it was almost certain they would spend years in prison. The scandal had generated real changes. The state government implemented new regulations for nursing homes. Now there were mandatory surprise inspections, security cameras in all facilities, and direct phone lines for complaints. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Eleanor had become an involuntary public figure. She was invited to give talks, participate in television programs, and share her story. At first she resisted. She had never liked being the center of attention, but then she understood that she had a platform she could use to help others. She spoke at universities about the abandonment of the elderly. She spoke in Congress about the need for better protection laws. She spoke in churches about forgiveness and dignity. And every time she spoke, her message was the same. The elderly are not a burden. We are the living memory of this country, and we deserve to end our days with love, respect, and dignity. Patrice began visiting her regularly. At first, the visits were uncomfortable, full of tense silences and superficial conversations. But little by little, very little by little, they began to rebuild something. It was not the relationship they had before. That was broken forever. But it was something new, something more honest. Patrice confessed that she had started therapy, that she was trying to understand why she had been capable of abandoning her own mother, that she was working on forgiving herself, although she knew it wouldn't be easy. "There are days when I can't look at myself in the mirror," she told her one afternoon while they were drinking coffee in Eleanor's small garden. "There are days when the weight of what I did is so great that I can't breathe. But I'm trying, Mum. I'm really trying to be better." "That's all I can ask of you," Eleanor replied. "That you try, and that when your time comes to be old, you treat the elderly with the respect I did not receive." 1 year after the scandal, Eleanor received a letter. It was from the United States, from the Department of Labor. Following David's investigation, they had reopened Thomas's death case. They had confirmed that the compensation had been paid fraudulently to Ellis Guerrero. And although they couldn't recover that specific money, they had decided to make a retroactive payment to Eleanor as a gesture of goodwill. The check was for $12,000. When Eleanor held it in her hands, she cried for the first time in months. Not because the money was a lot, although it was, but because finally, after 43 years, the US government recognized that Thomas had existed, that his death had meant something, that his widow deserved compensation. With that money, Eleanor did several things. First, she commissioned a dignified headstone for Thomas in the town cemetery, even though his body had never been recovered. The headstone read, "Thomas Guerrero, 1938, 1982, beloved husband, devoted father, died alone, but not forgotten." Second, she created a small fund to help other seniors in vulnerable situations. It wasn't much, but it could help pay for medicine, food, and some basic expenses for those who had nothing. Third, she gave Lupe $5,000 to buy things for her son. The young woman cried and tried to refuse the money, but Eleanor insisted, "You saved my life, sweetie. This money is nothing compared to that." She saved the rest for her old age. She didn't know how much time she had left. It could be months or years, but at least now she knew she wouldn't die in destitution. She wasn't going to die like Mr. Harrison or Mrs. Smith, forgotten and discarded. She was going to die with dignity. One afternoon in November, while Eleanor was watering her plants in the garden, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. She sat down on the cement bench, breathing deeply, waiting for it to pass. But the pain didn't pass. It intensified. Lupe, who had come to visit her, found her there and immediately called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors told her what she already suspected. Her heart was failing. The years of stress, hard work, and emotional pain had taken their toll. "How long?" Eleanor asked calmly. The doctor hesitated. "It's difficult to know exactly. It could be weeks, it could be months, but not years." "No, ma'am. I'm sorry." Eleanor nodded. She wasn't scared. She had lived 84 years. She had seen a lot. She had suffered a lot. But she had also fought. She had won. She had made her life mean something. When Patrice found out, she came immediately, this time without dark sunglasses, without expensive clothes, without pretense, just as a daughter who had finally learned what truly mattered. "Are you afraid?" she asked her mother. "No," Eleanor replied with honesty. "I've been afraid my whole life. Afraid of not having enough food for you. Afraid of you getting sick and not being able to pay a doctor. Afraid of dying alone and forgotten. But I'm not afraid anymore. I did what I had to do. I told the truth. I helped change something. And now, when my time comes, I will be at peace." "Did you really forgive me?" Patrice asked, with tears in her eyes. "Yes, daughter, truly. But more importantly, did you forgive yourself?" Patrice shook her head. "Not yet. I don't know if I ever can." "Well, you have to try," Eleanor said, taking her hand. "Because carrying guilt your whole life doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't help me, and it destroys you. What you did was wrong, but you don't have to pay for it for the rest of your life. Learn, change, be better. That's all you can do now." Eleanor spent her final weeks in her little house, not in a hospital. Surrounded by Lupe, by Patrice, by some of the seniors she had met at the home, and who were now free, by reporters who had become friends, by activists who admired her. She did not die alone. She did not die forgotten. One December morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky pink and orange, Eleanor opened her eyes for the last time. Lupe was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. Patrice was dozing in a chair on the other side. Eleanor looked around her small room. She saw the photograph of her wedding on the wall. She saw her grandmother's rosary hanging from a nail. She saw the flowers Lupe had brought her the day before, and she smiled. "Ma'am," Lupe whispered, "are you all right?" "Yes, sweetie," Eleanor replied, her voice weak but clear. "I'm all right. For the first time in a long time, I am truly all right. Do you need anything?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't need anything anymore. I have everything I wanted. Peace, dignity, and knowing that my life meant something." She paused and looked at Lupe with eyes full of love. "Take care of your son. Teach him to be brave. Teach him that doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always worth it." "I will. I promise." Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought of Thomas, of what their life together had been like, of the children they had raised. She thought of all the years of sacrifice, pain, and loneliness. But she also thought of the final victory, of how she had found her voice when everyone thought she was invisible, of how she had fought when the easiest thing would have been to give up. And in that moment, with the sun entering through the window and the warmth of a friend's hand in hers, Eleanor Guerrero exhaled her last breath. She died as she had lived, with dignity. Her funeral was small, but meaningful. Patrice organized everything and paid for every detail. It was the least she could do. Lupe brought her son, a 4-year-old boy who didn't quite understand what was happening, but had heard his mother talk so much about Mrs. Eleanor that he knew she was someone important. Also present were some of the seniors from the home who had survived and were now living with their families or in new, better, more dignified homes. David and his team of journalists came, human rights activists came, people who had never met Eleanor but had been touched by her story came. And when they lowered the coffin into the earth, next to the grave she had commissioned for Thomas, Patrice read some words she had written. "My mother taught me many things in life, but she taught me more in death. She taught me that it is never too late to do the right thing, that forgiveness is possible even after the worst betrayal, and that one person, a single person, can change the world if they have the courage to tell the truth. Mum, forgive me for failing you, and thank you for teaching me, finally, what truly matters." Months later, Congress approved the Eleanor Act, a comprehensive reform of the senior care system in the country. It established mandatory minimum standards for all nursing homes, created an independent inspection system, and severely punished mistreatment and fraud against the elderly. It wasn't perfect, no law is, but it was a start, and it bore her name. In the town square where Eleanor had been born, a bronze plaque was installed. It read, "Eleanor Guerrero, 1941, 2025, defender of the forgotten, voice of the silenced." She taught us that dignity has no age. Lupe visited that plaque every year on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, and each time she brought her flowers and told her about the good things that were happening, how more homes were being shut down for violations, how more seniors were being rescued, how more families were learning not to abandon their elders. "You did it, Ma'am," Lupe whispered each time. "You changed things, and we will never forget you." Because that was the final truth of Eleanor's story. She had not died forgotten. She had not died in vain. She had lived a life of sacrifice and pain, yes, but also of courage and meaning. And as she closed her eyes for the last time, she felt no fear or sadness. She felt that she was finally coming home.